change them in a minute.
Okay, when you're ready. He's fine.
He looks happy, Maria.
Oh, great.
You got that text?
Yeah, I guess I just released it.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for again traversing my challenging driveway at times, but I am glad you're here. We're going to talk some more this morning about the new moon. The more I look into the subject of the new moon, the more I realize that we could spend many weeks, maybe months, talking about this subject. But I also realize that because of some present circumstances, at this time I intend only to spend this service and one more of our assembled times together talking about the new moon. For now, I just want to summarize it and conclude it. I know there are many other passages that we need to deal with, we can deal with, we should look at, we will, I think, one day revisit it and look at it. But for now, I want to wrap it up with two more studies during our assembled times. So, are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to Numbers 10 and turn to Numbers 28. Welcome Suzanne and Alicia. We're glad to have them with us via Facebook this morning. Numbers 10, are you there? Verse 10. Also in the day of your gladness and in your solemn days and in the beginnings of your months, you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings, over the sacrifice of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial before your Elohim. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Then look in Numbers 28, verse 11. And in the beginning of your months you shall offer a burnt offering unto Yahweh, 2 young bullocks, and 1 ram, and 7 lambs for the first year without spot. This shall be where we focus this morning, is in those 2 passages. But let me first review a little bit about what we talked about last week. Last week, I stated that I am confident that there is no command to have a new moon celebration at the beginning of every month. I made it clear that I made that statement, or that I do make that statement, with meekness and with fear. But nevertheless, I am confident that there is no command to celebrate the new moon. The 3 primary reasons that I have given to you for this position are: number 1, I find no command in Torah to have a new moon celebration. Number 2, in all 20 passages that have the phrase new moon in them, the Hebrew word for moon, does anybody remember what that word is? Yariach. The Hebrew word for moon is in none of those 20 passages. The Hebrew word for new, anybody remember what that word is? Kodash or Kodash is not in any of them. Well, that's huge. When I read in my translation new moon, but I go look it up in the Hebrew and find neither the word for new nor the word for moon, that causes me some concern. If I'm going to read new moon, I should see the word new and moon in the Hebrew, but I do not see those. How can you have the phrase new moon without the word for new and without the word for moon? There would only be one way to do that, and that would be if there was some special Hebrew word that means new moon. But that's not the case either. In all 20 passages, so the third reason I'm confident that we are not commanded to keep a new moon celebration is that in all 20 passages that have the phrase new moon in them, that phrase new moon is always translated from the Hebrew word Kodesh, and Kodesh means what? Month. It's translated, or it's used 296 times, 276 times it's translated as month. It's only translated as new moon in the 20 passages that people use to say we are to celebrate the new moon. There's no justification for it being changed from month to new moon. No justification whatsoever. in other words, my contention is that you could take the word month and stick it in all 20 of those passages, and those passages still make sense. Actually, they make better sense. So therefore, I'm confident that had the word been translated as month instead of new moon, the word month would have worked, and it would have eliminated a lot of confusion as to whether we should be celebrating the new moon or not. So, again, just to put it in a condensed form, 3 reasons I'm confident that there is no command to celebrate the new moon. Number 1, no command in Torah. Number 2, the word for new and the word for moon in the Hebrew is not used. And number 3, the Hebrew word Chodesh means month, but it got changed in those 20 passages. So though I take my position and state my position with meekness and fear, I also state it with confidence. If someone wants to convince me that we are to commemorate and celebrate the new moon, I'm open to it. But the first thing they're going to have to help me understand is why there's no command in Torah, and why the word for new and moon are not used, and why the word for month got changed. They're going to have to convince me of those 3 things before they can convince me that we are to celebrate the new moon. But now let's go to our text for the day. Everybody understand that position? Why I've taken that position? Okay. Let's go to our text for today. I read to you out of Numbers 10. I read to you out of Numbers 28. Are those 2 passages in Torah or not? Yes. Okay. Numbers is part of Torah. I have been saying that there is no command in Torah to have a monthly celebration of the new moon. But when you look in Numbers 10, it says that we're to sound a trumpet in the beginning of our months. And then in Numbers 28:11, it says, and in the beginning of the months you shall offer burnt offerings unto Yahweh. Again, I've been stating for weeks now, there is no command in Torah. And I have been stating it in every service, and I've been stating that numerous times. And I wondered when I was doing that if anyone would say to me, what about Numbers 10? And what about Numbers 28? And only one person did. And we shared some things back and forth in private messages, and not publicly, but one person did say, what about Numbers 28 specifically? And it led to Numbers 10. It thrilled me that they did that, because every one of us are supposed to search the Scriptures daily to see if the things that are being said are so. Are you with me? Every one of us, not just those who might be in a denominational church, but all of us should be searching the Scriptures daily to see if what's being said is so. To get into the habit of just trusting that the person who is speaking to you is telling you the truth, or that the person speaking to you has all knowledge and understanding on a particular subject, is not a good habit to have. Search it out. See if it lines up with Torah. You know, all lying preachers would be out of a following if people would just do this one simple thing, test what they've heard. Yeah. You had a post on that, I think, yesterday, didn't you, James? If everybody would just test what they're hearing, and how do you test it? Go read a denominational book that agrees with what they said? How are you going to test it? You're going to have to go to Torah to test it. You're going to have to look in the Scriptures to test it. And then if you find a conflict between what's being said and what's written, you stick with what's written. Right? If people did that one simple test, it would put all lying preachers out of business. Or they wouldn't have any great followings. You with me? So it did thrill me that somebody tested what I was saying and came back and said, hey, how about Numbers 28? So let's go back to Numbers. In Numbers 10, Numbers 28, which are in Torah, now we've got to ask ourselves, are they telling us that we're to have a monthly new moon celebration? Well, let's look and see. If we're going to examine this, what's the first thing we need to do if we're going to seek to understand what these two passages are telling us? A good thing to do, one of the first things we ought to do is put it in context, but the other thing we need to do is look up the words that got translated. And that's simple to do. A Strong's Dictionary is a good place to start. And you can have the hardcover copy of Strong's, or eSword. It is just one of the best study tools, and we've mentioned this many times. eSword is an excellent resource for being able to look up Hebrew words and Greek words. So if we go to a Strong's Dictionary or an interlinear Bible, you mentioned that, I think, in yesterday's post. And an interlinear Bible is also a great means of being able to find the exact words that were used in the order that they were used. It brings a lot of clarity sometimes. So use a Hebrew dictionary, Strong's is one, or use an interlinear Bible. And don't just go by a different translation. Right. Don't say, okay, I don't understand it here in King James. Let me get this translation and see if it makes it more clear. That is not the way to do it. You've got to go back and look at the original words, okay? So let's go back, Numbers 10:10, and let's focus on this phrase, and in the beginnings of your month. Now, if you read this in context, the first thing you're going to find is that in this passage, we are being told that there are times that we should sound the trumpet. And the word used for trumpet here is not shofar. It's that ketzosera. I think it refers to a silver trumpet. But we are being told times that a trumpet should be sounded. And if you read the passage, like when you're about to go to war, Yahweh says, sound the trumpet. In other words, if you want to go to war by yourself, that's fine. If you want me to go to war with you, sound the trumpet. I'll go with you. And then it lists a lot of other times to sound the trumpet. In this passage, we're being told 2 times that we are to blow a trumpet. Number 1 is, you see it there? What would number 1 be? In your solemn days, that's the word moed. Moed means what? Appointed times, appointments. During the appointments that Yahweh set for us, sound your trumpet during those days, and when's the other time? During the beginning of your months. So, Numbers 10 is telling us to blow a trumpet. When you get to Numbers 28 uses the same wording, the beginning of your months, but it tells us what sacrifices are to be offered during that time. Okay, so Numbers 10 is telling us to blow a trumpet. Numbers 28 is telling us what sacrifices to use. Now, let me lay this groundwork for Numbers 28 so that we can understand what Numbers 28 is doing. In verses 1 through 10, Numbers 28 tells us the sacrifices for every Sabbath day. In verse 11 through 15, it tells us the sacrifices to be used at the beginning of our months. Verses 16 through 31 lists the sacrifices that are to be used for Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and Shavuot or Pentecost. It lumps all 4 of those together because you cannot separate them. They are connected. And then in Numbers 29, the first 6 verses tell us what sacrifices are to be used for Yom Teruah. Verses 7 through 11 tell us what sacrifices are to be for Yom Kippur. And then the rest of the chapter, verses 12 to the end of the chapter, tells us what sacrifices are to be offered for Sukkot. So Numbers 28 and number 29 are listing those sacrifices. Summarize before we go on. Number 10:10 mentions that a trumpet should be blown at the beginning of your months. Numbers 28:11 tells us the sacrifices that should be made at the beginning of the months. Does that mean that we should recognize every new moon with the sounding of a trumpet? And does that mean we should recognize every new moon by some type of sacrificial observance? Well, first of all, notice this. In that passage, if you look the words up, you will find that the word for new and the word for moon are not there. Same thing as we had before. If this were the justification for, if this passage, Numbers 10 and Numbers 28, if those passages are the justification for the 20 passages we see the phrase new moon, then these passages should also use the word new and should also use the word moon, but they do not. No, and here's my point. Numbers 10:10 does not say, sound the trumpet upon the new moon. We cannot infer that into the passage. We cannot force it into the passage. That's not what it says. Numbers 28 does not say, make these sacrifices upon every new moon. They say, blow the trumpet at the beginning of your months, and they say, make these sacrifices upon the beginning of your months. Now, what these passages do mention is very interesting. There's something here that we should be doing, and it appears to me that we have neglected to do it because we have missed it. We didn't know it was there. We are being instructed in these passages to do something, but it is not a monthly new moon celebration. So we'll get to that. Let's look at the word month. What is the word for month? Chodesh. So Chodesh is the word that is used here. So it should be translated month, and it is. But now look at the word beginnings. Has anybody looked that word up yet? Beginnings. What is the Hebrew word?
Rosh.
There you go. Rosh. Rosh. R-O-S-H-E, pronounced Rosh. Anybody know what Rosh means? It literally means the head. It indicates that something is first. It's the head of something either in time or in rank. That is, whatever it's talking about comes first chronologically, or it should be put first because of its importance. Does everybody understand that? That's what head means. It's the head of something. So here what we have is this phrase in Hebrew, Rosh Chodesh. Head, month. Now, when we're trying to interpret this, and a lot of people interpret it to mean the first of the month, the beginning of the month, or they interpret it to be the first part of a month, and therefore they infer into the passage the new moon or the beginning of a month. The phrase actually, Rosh Chodesh, can only be interpreted correctly if we go back to Exodus 12. Exodus 12 will explain to us what Torah means when it uses the phrase Rosh Chodesh. Are you there? Exodus 12. Look in verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be unto you Rosh Chodesh. It shall be the first month of the year to you. You see it? What month is he talking about? The month of Abib shall be the beginning of month. So what is the instruction here? What was Yahweh establishing in Exodus 12:2? He was establishing that the month of Abib would be the head month. It would be the beginning of months. It would be the month that began every year. Okay? So when I go back to Numbers 10 and to Numbers 28 and look at that exact same phrase, when I see the phrase Rosh Chodesh, I am not thinking that the beginning of every month is to be observed by the blowing of a trumpet or by offering sacrifices. Instead, I interpret them based on what Exodus 12:2 said to me, that Rosh Chodesh means the first month of the year. Rosh Chodesh does not refer to the beginning day of a month. Rosh Chodesh refers to the head month of every year. Everybody understand the distinction? Yes. It does not refer to the beginning day of a month. That is to force a meaning on it. It refers to the head month of every year. Abib is called Rosh Chodesh. So, go back with me now to Numbers 10. Verse 10, also in the day of your gladness and in your solemn days and in the beginnings of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings. So when are we being told to sound the trumpet? During Rosh Chodesh, at the head of the month, at the head month, at Abib. And then in Numbers 28:11, when are we being told to offer sacrifices? During Rosh Chodesh, at the head month. Now, here's the question we've got to deal with. Why are we being told to acknowledge, in Torah, Numbers 10 and Numbers 28, why are we being told to acknowledge the beginning of that month and it be separate than every other month?
Because it's the baseline for all the other moeds.
Say that one more time.
It's the baseline for all the moeds.
It is the baseline for all the moeds. What does that mean?
When you start to count.
If you don't get this one right, you'll miss all of them. If you don't know when the first month is and the first day of the first month is, then you cannot make the rest of the calendar work. You have to establish the first day of the first month if you're going to show up at the proper time for the appointed times that Yahweh has established in Leviticus 23. Everybody understand? If you remember last year when Abib was being set, do you remember all the confusion that was all over social media about when that first month was? There were a lot of people who thought it fell in March. There were a lot of people who thought it fell in April. There were some people that thought it didn't fall till May. There was a lot of confusion. And consequently, some were observing all of the feasts 30 days earlier than others were. And consequently, some were observing the feast, the appointed times, 30 days before everybody else was. And some people played it safe by observing it both times, just so they'd make sure they were there. Nothing wrong with that. But if we do not properly identify that first month, then we miss the appointed times of Yahweh by either showing up 30 days too soon or 30 days too late. Identifying Rosh Chodesh, the head month, the first month of the year, is of vital importance. It's vital to everything else we do throughout the year. It's vital to establishing every appointed time of Yahweh. So it stands to reason that Torah commands us to sound a trumpet and to offer sacrifices to Yahweh in thanksgiving to Him that He has made the beginning of that month known to us. Because if He didn't make the beginning of that month known to us, and He established it in Exodus 12, this shall be the beginning of your months. Now that we know that, then we can go read Leviticus 23 and know when every other appointed time takes place, because He told us how to identify the first month. So, I'm convinced that Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 are instruction for the celebration of the beginning of the month that marks the beginning of a new year. You can call it a New Year celebration if you want to. But that is what it's calling forth for, is a celebration of the beginning of Abib that starts the new year. Not instruction for the celebration of every new moon. Now, why am I confident of that? Let me restate my reason for this confidence. The word new is not there in Numbers 10, Numbers 28. The word for moon is not there in Numbers 10 or Numbers 28. And the phrase Rosh Chodesh used in Exodus 12:2, we are told that phrase means it's the head month of a year. It makes sense to interpret Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 based upon the understanding we get from Exodus 12:2. Now, everybody understand that? All right, so in closing, I want to show you some other passages and the wording that is used there. For time's sake, I printed these out to you and I gave them to you on a piece of paper. You can turn to them in your Bible or on your phones or tablets, whatever you want to do, but I did print them out for you. For time's sake, I'm going to depend upon you to look up the context of them. Today, all I want to do is to point out a particular phrase that's used in each one of these. It will help us to understand. It'll help us to understand Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 when we get to the end of it. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 3. Everybody see that on your handout. All right, it says this. It came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spake unto the children of Israel according to all that Yahweh had given him in commandment unto them. First day of the month. This is the Hebrew word or Hebrew phrase, Echad Kodesh, E-C-H-A-D. Echad Kodesh, the first day of the month. So what month are we talking about here in verse 3? It told the 11th. So he's referring on the first day of the 11th month, Moses stood up and spoke to the children of Israel. Now notice that there's no mention of it being a new moon, but there had to be one, right? But no mention of it. There's no mention of a new moon celebration. There is no mention of the sounding of a trumpet, and there's no mention of the sacrifices. Numbers 10 and Numbers 28 said a trumpet should be sound and there should be sacrifices, but yet here we see the first day of the 11th month being mentioned, and neither one of those two things takes place. All we're told is that Moses stood up to say some things. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of the congregation on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying. So here the phrase again is Echad Kodesh, the first day of the second month. No mention of a new moon, though it had to be there. No mention of a new moon celebration, no mention of trumpets being sounded, no mention of sacrifices, just simply that is the day that Moses stood up and said some things. Numbers 33, verse 38. And Aaron the priest went up into Mount Hor at the commandment of Yahweh, and he died there. In the 40th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the first day of the 5th month. So Echad Kodesh, first day, 5th month, that's the day that Aaron died. 40th year after they had come out of Egypt. Same points we would make. No mention of sounding of the trumpet, no mention of sacrifices. It just happened to be the day that Aaron died. Ezra, chapter 3, verse 6. From the first day of the 7th month began they to offer burnt offerings unto Yahweh. But the foundation of the temple of Yahweh was not laid. There's that phrase again, Echad Kodesh, the first day of the 7th month. However, what's different about this passage than was different about the other ones? There are sacrifices being offered. So is this indicating to us there should be a new moon celebration if sacrifices are being offered? None of them were mentioned in the others. But here sacrifices are being mentioned. Somebody please. Please tell me why sacrifices are being offered on this day when they weren't offered on the 5th month, the 11th month, or the 2nd month. We read about those months a while ago. 2nd month, 5th month, 11th month, we were told things happened, but there's no sacrifices. But now we read about the first day of this month and sacrifices are being offered. Why? Yom Teruah. What day does Yom Teruah begin on? The first day of the 7th month. And if you read Numbers 29 lists for you the sacrifices that are to be made on Yom Teruah. And so Ezra 3:6 is telling us on the first day of the 7th month, they're not celebrating the new moon. They're offering sacrifices as prescribed in Numbers 29 for Yom Teruah. Okay? Nehemiah chapter 8. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate. And there spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which Yahweh had commanded to Israel. And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, both of men and women, and all that could hear with understanding upon the first day of the 7th month. Again, Echad Kodesh, the first of the month. There is some type of religious observance taking place, but you will see not because it's the first day of the 2nd month, or the first day of the 5th month, or the first day of any other month. This is taking place because it's the first day of the 7th month, and the first day of the 7th month, again, marks Yom Teruah. Now go to Ezekiel 26. It came to pass, verse 1, in the 11th year, in the first day of the month, that the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Echad Kodesh is the phrase used there, the first day of the month. So the first day of the month is used here again. No mention of it being a new moon, but it had to be. No mention of a new moon celebration. No mention of sounding a trumpet, offering sacrifices. Ezekiel is just saying that happened to be the day that he heard Yahweh speak. Ezekiel 29:17. Came to pass in the 7th and 20th year, in the first month, first day of the month, the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, again, Echad Kodesh. We'll talk about that one in a minute. Chapter 32, verse 1. Came to pass in the 12th year, in the 12th month, in the first day of the month, that the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying. So here we have Echad Kodesh, the first day of the month of the 12th month. Yahweh spoke to him. Now, here's where I've been wanting us to get. Ezekiel 45. You need to mark this one. It's very, very, not that they all aren't important. They are. But in this passage has some keys that will help us understand the things that are being told to us about Rosh Chodesh. Ezekiel 45:18. Thus saith Yahweh Elohim, in the first month, in the first day of the month, you shall take a young bullock without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary. Notice that the first day of the first month has some special instruction that's different than all of the others. This word, notice how it's worded here. We don't just have Rosh Chodesh in this one, or Echad Kodesh in this one. What we have is in the first month, in the first day of the month. The first day of the month is Echad Kodesh. Look it up. Mark it down. I want to slow down to make sure we get that. See the phrase, first day of the month? That is Echad Kodesh. But notice that there is another word there, in the first. In the first. That is the Hebrew word Rishon, R-I-S-H-O-N. Strong says that it comes from the Hebrew word Rishah, R-I-S-H-A-H. Strong says of the Hebrew word Rishah that it is the same. Everybody say same. Same. Rishah is the same as Rosh. It's a synonym of Rosh. Rosh and Rishah mean the same thing. What does Rosh mean? The head. So Ezekiel 45:18 is talking about that head month of the year and something that's to take place in the first day of that head month. So there's no instruction concerning the first day of the other months. There is only instruction concerning the first day of the first month and the first day of the 7th month. Let's read this one in context. Are you ready? Verse 18. Thus saith Yahweh Elohim, in the first month, in the first day of the month, you shall take a young bullock without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary. And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering and put it upon the post of the house and upon the four corners of the settle of the altar and upon the post of the gate of the inner court. And so you shall do the 7th day of the month for every one that erreth, and for him that is simple, so shall you reconcile the house. In the first month, in the 14th day of the month, you shall have the Passover, a feast of 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. Now, this passage clears up a lot of confusion if you will let it say what it says. Notice, there is instruction for the first day of what month? Abib, that first month. The first day of the first month. Notice, there is also instruction for the first day of the 7th month. What day is that? Yom Teruah. Then notice in verse 21, it goes into instruction for the moeds of Passover and unleavened bread. And if you read the rest of that passage, you will see that he begins to deal with the other moeds and what's supposed to be done upon those appointed days. These are the celebrations that we are to observe. Ezekiel is outlining for us that we are to observe the first day of the first month, which is backed up in Torah. If he said this, or we read this, and it wasn't backed up in Torah, we'd have to say, what? But he said the first day of the first month, and you say, okay, he's telling me to observe the first day of the first month. That's not in Leviticus 23, but when we search the rest of Torah, we get to Numbers 10, we get to Numbers 28, we find out that what he's telling us is commanded in Torah. So there is instruction for the first day of the month, and there is instruction for the first day of the seventh month, and there is instruction for Passover and unleavened bread and first fruits and Shavuot and Teruah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot. There's instruction for all of those, but there is no instruction found anywhere for the first day of every other month. All right. So I'm going to conclude. 3 reasons why I am confident that we're not to observe the new moon. Somebody repeat them back to me. What are the 3 reasons that we can be confident we're not commanded to keep the new moon? It's not commanded in Torah. Second reason. The Hebrew word for new and moon are not in there. What's the third reason? The Hebrew word for Chodesh means what? Month, not new moon. So now when we look at Numbers 10 and Numbers 28, we can also be confident that these passages are not commanding us to celebrate every new moon. How can we be confident of that? Because the word for new and the word for moon are not used there either. We can also be confident because the phrase Rosh Chodesh refers to the head month of every new year, not the beginning of every new month. There is no biblical reference that mentions the first day of the month as being a special occasion unless it is the first month and the 7th month. That's the only times we're told to recognize the first day of a month. Ezekiel 45 clarifies that it only refers to the first month and the 7th month because Ezekiel 45 only mentions the first month and the 7th month and the first day of those 2 months. He does not mention the first day of all the rest of them. If Ezekiel 45 and Ezekiel 46 are listing again the sacrifices that are supposed to take place by Yahweh's people, and he goes to the trouble of, you don't understand it's not trouble, but he takes the time to list them all. Why didn't he mention the first day of the 2nd month and the first day of the 3rd month, the first day of the 4th month? Because there is no such celebration that's supposed to take place on those. Right. It's only on the 1st month, which we have missed. Yes. We should have a New Year celebration. Yes, we should. Not January 1, right. On the first day of Abib. There should be a celebration. It should be recognized because it is of great importance we know when that day is. Hallelujah. So we should do that. But I am confident, after examining all the other passages we've looked at, after examining Torah, after looking at Numbers 10 and Numbers 28, I am confident that we're not commanded to celebrate the first day of every other month that exists. The first one and the 7th one only. Now, next week, I'm going to wrap this up because I want to look at a couple of passages that might take a little bit more time to look at. One in 1 Samuel 20, one in 1 Kings. We'll look at those, talk about that, we'll wrap it up, summarize it, and then we're going to move on to other things. Any questions or comments? Stand up. Is that simple enough?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure. I'm going to be very careful here because let me back. I want to make sure I'm real careful how I state this. The scripture is telling us to celebrate the first day of a month. It is not commanding us to celebrate our sighting of a new moon.
Right. Right.
We can get into some questionable practices when our emphasis becomes upon that crescent moon.
That's right.
Yes.
Torah is very specific You shall observe the first day of the first month, and you shall observe the first day of the 7th month. But it doesn't say one word about a crescent moon.
Yes, sir.
Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. As his name is put upon you, rejoice, for he has blessed you.
Amen.
Hallelujah. You're dismissed.